Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're down to, I think hopefully quite an exciting final session this afternoon. I can't believe it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It feels like we just started this discussion. It's been great so far. So welcome, I'm Laura MacDonald and I have the privilege of moderating this final session this afternoon. So please, my colleagues, gentlemen, lady, please have a seat and we will jump in. We have a somewhat compressed, we don't have the benefit of an hour, we have a half hour. So we will try not to speak too quickly. I am Scottish, I am infamous for speaking too quickly, so please wave hands, throw things at me if I'm speaking too quickly. But actually, I don't think I'll be your problem this afternoon. I think I would like my colleagues to be doing most of the speaking. So I'd like to kick off this fourth session this afternoon, which I think has quite a daunting title. Thanks, Lisa, IMPAC3T-IP people. So apparently it's a forward-looking session to synthesize conference learnings, showcase relevant outputs, and perhaps formulate some concrete policy suggestions to the European Commission. So no mean feat. And we have 25 minutes to try and do that. So what we're actually going to do, let me just kick off. I actually have the controller here. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Laura MacDonald, and my role in life for the last several years has been to head up the Pan-European Members Association of Knowledge Transfer Professionals, which is called ASTP. So lots of reference to phrases I recognise: capacity building, networking, learning, professionalisation. That's what our network is all about. And I think many of you here in this room are members, or I have certainly encountered and met you in different guises. And we're very interested as a community, not just as frontline professionals, practitioners. All of these themes, crisis, co-creation and classical plus, are all very familiar to many of the communities, as are both SHAPE, SSHA and STEM. So all of the things I've learned, my colleague sitting next to me has noticed me taking many notes, lots of to-dos for ASTP, taking away to further disseminate. But this afternoon, what I want to do now is jump in here and briefly introduce our three panelists. In no particular order, but Lisa in the middle. Obviously, all of you by now will know she is popping up in several guises in this afternoon session. But I think for this afternoon, and maybe this is the first chance we get to sort of introduce her context and background, but Lisa started out life as a physicist. I don't know how many of you in the knowledge valorization world have realised quite how many physicists are in our space. It's quite astonishing. So they obviously find very useful things to do in life once they finish their physics degree, and Lisa's one of them. So she has spent many years both practically in valorising early on her own research field, got into the world of spin-off startups, and for the last 20 years or so has been very busy getting very involved in understanding and helping the rest of us understand the how to do better and really upskill capacity on really hands-on project development at knowledge valorisation technology transfer stage, with particular emphasis on some major projects recently, like in the Western Balkans and the IP Booster project. So Lisa, thank you. Give you the floor shortly. So we've got somebody who's very, very busy with hands-on projects, lots of experience. We also have Bruno van der Meulen, who is a Belgian national. And for many years, his professional expertise is as an intellectual property lawyer, did that for many years in a major multinational. 2019 changed his context and actually has jumped headfirst into the world of impact licensing, equitable access licensing, as Lisa prefers to call it, but the world of impact licensing. And when we hear from him shortly, you'll understand better some of the things that he has been helping to drive and champion. And certainly in the context of this afternoon, I know will bring some very valuable insights to the landscape. So he's one of the passionate champions for many years of this landscape. And then we also have, from a completely different sector, Alessandro Fazio, who again, many of you may know from the JRC Technology Transfer Competence Centre based in Brussels. So I think your background is from LSE, London School of Economics. You've done international relations and various other things, so something like that. So maybe not so much a hard STEM subject, but you come certainly with a very kind of transnational perspective on things, but especially for the last 11 or so years working within the European Commission. And obviously Technology Transfer Centre in the title of your current role means that this is a space very close to your heart. And I know from personal experience at ASTP that the unit where Alessandro works is highly informed and highly effective in gathering insights and sharing information and dissemination. So I think this is a really great combination of people to be on this panel, because if at the end of the day, in fact, we may even have a shortcut, Alessandro's on the panel, policy recommendations to the European Commission. Give that man a pen, make sure he records everything. No, seriously, what we want to do is just address in the next 25 minutes or so, a couple of key points that might be worth pursuing at this stage. And I think the structure of the day so far has given us all a fantastic insight with an opportunity to focus, however briefly, on each of the co-creation, crisis and classical plus scenarios. And I think we've all had quite a lot of takeaways and learnings from that. But I think when we were having our planning session about what we would discuss this afternoon with regard to kind of having a more kind of a synthesis of what would be the most useful output of a fourth panel this afternoon, because there are only 3 topics of the toolbox, but the fourth is, and this is where we have this landscape of different perspectives. And the first key question which I would like to pose to certainly to Bruno and to Lisa in the first instance, and then I'll come to Alessandro, is actually what's missing from the impact licensing equitable access landscape? A little bit the penultimate question that was asked in the last round. So what is kind of missing from the landscape? We've heard in each of the first 3 panels about the roles of the researchers, from the roles of society, from the roles of the institutions. I think what we haven't maybe heard so much so far is who else in the ecosystem, what else in the ecosystem as an institution can actually play a role in, yes, Lisa's diving for the microphone, play a role in facilitating the better evolution and embedding of all the principles of improving impact on society and on economy. Lisa, please, floor is yours.
I'll try again. That's better. Okay, right. For me, what I would like to see playing a much stronger role in the ecosystem are funding agencies, which of course would include the European Commission. But all the national ones, the ones that fund particular types of research, whether that is social science or whether that is medical science, I think they have a huge role to play in bringing more impact from research. At the moment, I think they are not playing a strong enough role because they have almost said, well, it's somebody else's decision to take this. As I think I said in this morning's session, if you look towards the Wellcome Trust, if you look towards the Gates Foundation, they make it a requirement that you get impact from what they fund. And they don't take that on trust. They pursue you down the road, and they'll pursue you down the road for years. I mean, not just the length of your grant, wanting to know what you have concretely achieved or what efforts you are making to make this happen. And I think this would be helpful in putting probably more pressure on researchers, not to just say, well, it's over, I tried, it's finished, but also to put technology transfer officers in a stronger position, particularly for healthcare, in saying, we have no choice. Our hands are tied. The money came with conditions, and the conditions were equitable access, responsible licensing. We cannot take that off the table. So I would really like to see a much stronger role for funding agencies in getting impact.
Thank you, Lisa. Bruno.
I can only concur with what Lisa's saying. At the Impact Licensing Initiative, we have formulated some recommendations also for the FP10 program, how impact could be created in the funding programs. And one of the first suggestions is to invite, not to make it mandatory, but to invite and strongly encourage proposals to include the societal use of the technology. Now, in our organization, we know that's not easy because very often IP owners or companies say, our technology works, but how can you make it into a societal need? How can you make it answer a societal need? Well, we did it. We convinced a major warehouse company here in Belgium who had a cooling technology that it was possible to use its technology in Africa for totally different purposes than for which they had designed it. And so you have to think a bit. You have to encourage in a proposal to say, think a bit about the societal use that you can make of it, and keep in mind, we do not ask it to devote the entire technology to that societal purpose. It's an additional purpose. Try to think about what you can do on top of the normal commercial exploitation. So, and that is a very, very important criterion, which we call at ILI the additionality. So the other day, I was introduced as a speaker about a second life of IP. And that's a dangerous term, using the word second life, because it would mean that the first life has to end first. No, during the main life of IP, the only life, because IP only has one life, you should think about an additional purpose. You should think about repurposing the technology, about using the data that can be generated for societal purposes. And that's a second aspect. We call also that the applicants make suggestions to make societal use of the data that are generated with the technology. And that's a very important aspect, because a lot of data that have societal usefulness get lost in a program. And we distinguish basically between three types of data. You have technology data that should go back to the technology owner in every licensing program, because on an exclusive basis, even because they can improve the technology. So if you have data that are technically valuable, the IP owner, the licensor, can get it back. But you have a lot of societal data also that can be created, and those should be made available to knowledge institutions, to local authorities, and those should be made available not to the licensor necessarily, but to what we call then an impact licensing institute, or an access house or so, other organizations that can use those data. Make that clear in the proposal. There are also commercial data, and that is more sensitive, because sharing commercial data between competitors is illegal. So you must very carefully define what type of commercial data can be used to create new ventures, similar ventures in other jurisdictions. So the data model, the commercial data model, can serve as an example, but it can of course not be used to feed a competitor with sensitive data that would undermine the project. So that's the second recommendation that we make. The third recommendation that we make: think about making an IP impact pool. Try to define in your program the possibility for an impact pool for disasters, for natural catastrophes. There is a very large need, and the EU Commission is working on that and trying to centralize technology that in times of crises can be used. Emergency crises, and when the emergency arises, it's too late to think about it, to think about how the use of IP is, because we saw that in 2020 when there was a loud outcry for compulsory licensing, which is absolutely not what is desired. It's impact licensing that can offer a solution. I was recently in Turkey a month ago with ILI, where we were listening at the University of Istanbul about technologies to fight earthquakes, to avoid buildings to collapse in earthquakes. That is something that you must make available before and immediately after crisis, to see how that can be developed, how that can be rolled out. These programs should exist, and they should be pooled, and mechanisms, contractual mechanisms, should be made available to trigger the impact license when it is necessary. And then a last suggestion that we made, and you heard maybe about this morning, because the MPP has it too, and a few universities, proposing an access plan. So not just making it very vaguely explain what the societal use of technology can be, but very concretely make an access plan, propose how a venture, a hypothetical venture that would be set up to exploit the technology, would access the technology, make a business plan, and explain how it works. That is what we think is missing, and that's what we try to formulate in those recommendations. And we're very curious to see what the Commission will do with it.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Lisa. Bruno, you've covered quite a lot of ground here. So thank you, Alessandro, if you'd like to.
Well, the very first thing I should do is apologize, because I'm just an imposter from the policymaking beast back in Brussels. Even though I do have experience running the technology transfer office of the JSC, which is a research center, so I've got excuses, so to speak. Now, I think I've heard a lot today, and I think I must start by saying that you have to understand the European Commission is a policy-making organization. So we have a tendency to think that you can legislate anything. And that means legislating impact and legislating change as well, which is not necessarily the case. And we always operate by consensus, meaning that occasionally we go for the lowest common denominator. But I think if you look at what has been happening over the last few years, we're not completely impermeable to the outside world, and we have shifted our focus a little bit. So if you look, for example, at the way some of the research programs work, we have switched to mission-based programs. So we've got cancer, climate, cities, ocean, and whatever it is. And this idea that it's not simply researchers in a lab or in a corporation, but that you co-create solutions with cities, with citizens, with public authorities, with NGOs, and all the rest. You've got the new program around the innovation ecosystem, which is looking at social innovation. It's looking at place-based innovation. It's looking at the diffusion of best practices. Something that we started already a few years ago, but like the joint undertakings, like the Innovative Medicines Initiative, or like the fuel cells and hydrogen joint undertaking, this idea that you put the public and the private sector together around a shared research agenda, so that you don't end up simply with a package of solutions looking for a problem, but with a body of knowledge that already has built-in impact pathways, because the industry is already involved at a very early stage. And I mean, specifically at the JSC, I think when it comes to impact, even the Commission has understood the basic TT metrics. So number of patents, number of spin-offs, patent families, counting unicorns is something that we are absolutely obsessed at. But just last year, we did a study working with 35 research centers in Europe, where we went and we looked at the spin-offs that they had created over the last 15 years. We spoke with the CEOs, we spoke with the people running the companies, and we tried to understand, these were deep tech spin-offs, we tried to understand what sort of impact are these companies having on local industrial ecosystems and on reindustrialization in Europe. So not just thinking in terms of output metrics, but how many suppliers, what sort of value chains are they reactivating locally? So there are really many ways, and I'm not even going to go into the whole impact licensing and the connection with LDCs. Those are very important. But just to say, I think the Commission is taking an interest in this, as proven by the fact that we have funded the Impact Licensing Initiative. And it's a slow process, but I think we are reorienting in a direction that understands impact a little bit more and that understands it a little bit more broadly.
Can I just do a follow-up your way? Throw a follow-up your way. We've heard several times, I think, in the panels this morning about the challenges both with and for researchers in the institutions. Do you see the European Commission having a role to help somehow reorientate the kind of recognition and accreditation landscape? So that challenge of people who are good researchers and being asked and expected, increasingly expected, to deliver not just great research and good teaching, but also impact at the end of the day that will require their time as well. Is that, is that something for the institutions or national, or what kind of role there?
I mean, of course, it's a national competence ultimately, but the Commission has a role there, and I think the sort of third mission of universities and the importance of motivating researchers and everything else is recognized, but probably nowhere near as much as it should be. If you look at the strategy that was published by my colleagues, the European Strategy for Universities, you will see that the third mission is almost non-existent in there, but we'll get there, hopefully.
The gap. You can take a note. I'll take the microphone off you and you can take a note. Anyway, thank you. Thank you, everyone. We're eating up lots of the time of our half hour. So I'd like to jump to the next question. So having sort of identified where there's an opportunity to talk about kind of key gaps and where you think they'd be filled, is please, lovely to showcase, because I think one of the great things about the first three panels is this real tangible picture you get when you hear examples, context. So I think it would be great if you maybe start with Bruno. If you want to share with us any really good examples that you think are in existence with regard to achieving the goal of much more effective both societal and economic impact. And clearly it's a cue. You've already talked a little bit about impact licensing, but maybe you want to give a little bit more insight or an example of what's happened so far.
Thank you, Laura. And to pick in on speaking about the researchers, what's good for the researchers, we have a fantastic example in Belgium that can be duplicated everywhere, where researchers from the beginning identified the societal potential of their technology. And of course, in a university, they're pushed to set up a commercial venture, a spin-out, which they did incorporate. But at the same time, they set up a foundation. At the same time, who had actually as purpose, the societal use of that same technology. And then the only problem, technical and legal problem, is to find a dividing line. Here in this case, it was quite simple because it was a technology that produced hydrogen out of solar panels. You can put that solar panel for 10 years in the field and it produces hydrogen without any other intervention, just with solar light. And the division line was the pressure, because the high pressure was very commercially attractive, was very expensive to commercialize and to put it on the market. The low pressure was the one that the foundation took and that we as impact licensing set a venture up for. That was the low pressure hydrogen that was stored at low cost, that could be transported at low cost, and that could be transported to poor societies living in remote areas where gas and other combustion sources were not easily available. And that was an example of how an academic institution, pushed by the researchers themselves, made from the outset the right decision to make the split. And I don't see a reason why that could not be done elsewhere. And I give that as an example because it really illustrates how you can make that additionality from the outset. And of course, when it starts from the researchers themselves, what better guarantee can you have that it will work? No,
that sounds great from an academic perspective. Lisa, what would you like to share?
I want to briefly share two examples. Neither of them are technology-based. They came out of the work that IMPAC3T did in its first year when we talked to a lot of people about what they had done with their research results. And you can find many, many more in one of our deliverables where we have lots of case studies. And they illustrate very different things for me. One of them is TIVA. This is an anti-bullying campaign that came out of Finland, where what we saw was very excellent research commissioned by their government. And because it was very excellent research and it came up with a series of results and recommendations over how you could tackle bullying in schools, they were able to use the results of that research to roll out anti-bullying campaigns nationally. And they've seen the results. Bullying has been majorly diminished. But this was a top-down government-funded research, which has then been transferred to other countries because you can apply to license the materials based on this excellent research. You can all see the peer-reviewed material, but you can license the approach, the training material, what is done in schools, and they use the international aspect in order to fund being able to do it free locally. And part of that is based on the translations for it. So this is somewhere where we have seen excellent research from the social sciences have a major impact in the country and abroad, but funded top down. And the other examples that we saw in the IMPAC3T project, which I also want to highlight, are ones that were individual research groups. Some from social sciences and humanities again, but some of them who were doing work in things like diet, dog behavior, canine behavior, eating disorders, where although the research itself, again, is peer-reviewed and published, what you have are questionnaires, copyrighted, that can be distributed, along with interpretation. And what I think is so important here is that we've seen examples of quite small research groups who've said, well, we could actually license this online. We can do it through a Creative Commons license. We can probably manage it ourselves as a research team. We don't need to involve the Technology Transfer Office in doing all these licenses. So it becomes quite low cost, which is important for the social sciences. But they see that it has an impact for for society. It can be used by vets, by individuals, and so forth, done through that. And one of the reasons I like that is I think that although obviously we can legislate top down and you can make people do things through funding, there is this huge impact to be had if enough individual small research teams said, we could do that. We now have the tools to do it. We have the examples to do it. We see how we can do it ourselves without even really needing to involve the Technology Transfer Office. And this, for me, has a little bit of parallels with an election in the United States quite a lot of years ago, where we had some really big donors that gave massive amounts of money, and we had an awful lot of individuals that gave $10. And I think what we need inside the community is an awful lot of individual researchers who say, I could do that, I could do that. And you end up with a sea change happening at lower level. So that would be my second one. Go and have a look at it, you know, or examples. And things like the canine behaviour, I think is a really good example of that one.
Great, thank you. Alessandro, can I ask you quickly to just highlight any other maybe national examples of good policies or experiences or whatever that you've come across that might be worth highlighting this afternoon?
Well, if it's knowledge transfer practices that we are interested in, yeah, I mean there are loads. Obviously, maybe not member states, but
No.
The UK is certainly ahead of the. I mean, the knowledge transfer partnerships have been running for years. This whole idea of embedding young graduates into industry for years to help them understand how transfer works. Another English-speaking country, also in the North Atlantic, Ireland, the TTSI programs, which is now finished. Now it's become the I think they call it the KT Boost, but that's also another program that has worked very successfully, and that has shifted really from training technology transfer officers to actually improving the capacity and the ability of KTOs TTOs to do transactions. Germany, perhaps unsurprisingly, which is slightly different from the rest of Europe because they don't really train technology transfer officers. They make technology transfer officers part of the curriculum and career development of researchers. So that's, for example, what Helmholtz does with the InnoSuper and everything else. And I mean, there are loads, but these are the ones I had in my notes at the moment. And if you want to think specifically in terms of impact, again, the UK with the Higher Education Innovation Fund that privileges impact as one of the award criteria. Of course, the Norwegians that have recently had a sort of a Bayh-Dole type moment to encourage people to push technologies and research results out onto society. I mean, there are many examples.
Yeah.
So the list is very, very long.
It's true. And I think maybe one of my to-do actions after this is to go away and double check the EU efficient database and platform and see how many of the good examples that you've mentioned specifically are there. And if not, we can certainly all collectively around the room, I'm sure we're here, out of interest to learn together, exchange together, but also to reinforce visibility of the different inspiring examples, case studies, tools, platforms, etc. So, for example, the EU Efficient platform might be a great place where we can also store and make reference in some way to that. So I don't know if that's opening floodgates, I hope, of increasing that. And on a more sort of individual level, there's a knowledge valorization platform, which some of you might be aware of, where, again, great case studies and examples, not just of actual ways of handling technology transfer, but of national policies and such like can also be found. So I think we have more than slightly overrun by 3 minutes. I'm so sorry, our allotted time together. But what I would like to do now is first two things, and you don't need to move away. We will stay here. There will be another person joining the podium. But first of all, could I maybe invite you to thank our colleagues for encompassing such a small time? Thank you.